In the soft glow of an early summer afternoon in Pacifica, California, the city exuded a serene yet vibrant energy. Gentle ocean breezes mixed with the scent of salt and eucalyptus, and the sky was a wash of clear blue. In this coastal town, where art and nature met the pulse of urban life, life moved at its own unhurried pace. On that particular day, President Barack Obama was set to travel in his signature motorcade, a sleek and dignified convoy that embodied the authority of the nation. The Cadillac One, resplendent in polished chrome and deep blue accents, led the procession along the broad avenues, its presence both a symbol of national leadership and a promise of service to the people. As the motorcade glided along the sunlit boulevard, the warm rays of the California sun danced on the hoods of the vehicles, casting fleeting reflections on the pavement. President Obama sat in the lead car, his calm gaze fixed on the road ahead while his advisors discussed matters of state. His thoughts were occupied with the challenges of his office, the persistent quest to balance global responsibilities with the immediate needs of his citizens. Yet, as he listened to the soft hum of conversation in the car, his attention was abruptly diverted by an unusual sight. Outside the window, amidst the steady flow of pedestrians and the rhythmic bustle of city life, stood an elderly woman. She was slight and frail, with a shock of silver hair and a face deeply etched by time and hardship. Clutched in her trembling hands was a worn piece of cardboard bearing simple yet heart-wrenching words. "Please help me. My granddaughter needs a miracle." Her eyes, clouded with sorrow and determination, scanned the busy sidewalk as if pleading for someone to notice her plight. In that moment, the vibrant tapestry of Pacifica's urban life paused, as if in collective awe. President Obama felt an immediate and profound tug at his heart. It was as if the gentle call of the woman's silent cry had reached into the depths of his soul. Without a moment's hesitation, he spoke in a clear, measured tone that resonated with genuine compassion. "Stop the car." His voice carried both the weight of authority and the tenderness of empathy. The advisors exchanged startled glances, and the steady hum of the motorcade came to an abrupt halt in the middle of the busy street. The lead vehicle's brakes squealed as it came to a stop, and the normally orchestrated convoy was momentarily interrupted by the unexpected command. Security personnel watched in astonishment as President Obama stepped out of the vehicle, his polished shoes clicking on the sun-warmed asphalt. The air seemed to grow quieter as every eye turned toward him, drawn by the rarity of this act of personal intervention. Walking slowly toward the solitary figure on the crowded sidewalk, President Obama's expression was one of earnest concern rather than the usual detachment of high office. He approached the elderly woman, whose posture was timid yet unyielding, as though she carried the burdens of a lifetime yet still clung to a fragile hope. "Ma'am," he said softly, "what is your name?" His voice, gentle and respectful, cut through the ambient noise of the street, drawing the attention of passers-by who began to record the scene on their mobile devices. After a pause that seemed to stretch on, the elderly woman lifted her head and, with a voice quavering between fear and hope, replied, "My name is Eleanor." Her eyes met his with a mixture of apprehension and a glimmer of relief, as if she had been waiting for someone to acknowledge her suffering. "Sir, I have been standing here for hours," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost everything in the storm. My family, my home. Now it's just me and my granddaughter. I have no one to turn to." The word struck President Obama deeply. He knelt down to her level, his gaze fixed on her weary, yet resilient eyes, and said, "Eleanor, I want to hear your story. Please, tell me what happened." There was no arrogance in his tone, no hint of condescension, only sincere compassion and the promise that he was there to help. As Eleanor began to recount the events of recent months, a heavy silence enveloped the small crowd that had gathered around them. Eleanor explained that a violent storm had battered Pacifica several months prior, causing widespread devastation. In the aftermath, many families were left homeless and desperate, but her own tragedy was the most acute. "I lost my home," she said softly, "and my husband was taken from us in the chaos. My only remaining family is my granddaughter, whom I love more than life itself. Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the worn cardboard sign, a testament to her pleas for help. Every day, I stand here hoping that someone will see me, that someone will help us rebuild our lives. I have tried, but no one stops. President Obama listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. In that moment, the bustling city and its fleeting distractions faded into the background. He gently placed his hand on Eleanor's shoulder and said, "Eleanor, I will not let your voice be unheard. I will ensure that help reaches you and every family in need." His statement was not merely a promise. It was a commitment born of genuine care and the belief that even the smallest act of compassion could transform lives. Rising to his full height, President Obama turned back toward his motorcade. "Prepare to follow me," he instructed his security detail with quiet authority. "I want to go to the place where you are staying." His advisors protested softly, warning that the area was unsafe and that he should not compromise the security of the convoy. But Obama's resolve was unwavering. "If a family in need can be helped, then I must do it," he said firmly. Sometimes, duty means putting aside protocol for the sake of humanity. Within minutes, the motorcade moved slowly through the crowded streets as President Obama led the way beside Eleanor. The crowd, initially stunned by his unexpected intervention, now followed with a mixture of admiration and hope. Phones were raised and cameras recorded every moment as the president, his expression a blend of determination and empathy, walked side by side with the elderly woman. As they made their way through Pacifica's neighborhoods, Eleanor described her modest living conditions, a makeshift shelter in a rundown area of the city where countless others struggled to survive in the wake of disaster. "We have no proper shelter," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Just a tattered tent and a few belongings that I have managed to save." Her words painted a stark picture of neglect and hardship that resonated deeply with those who witnessed her plight. Reaching the area, President Obama surveyed the scene with a critical eye. The neighborhood was a maze of dilapidated buildings and littered streets, where hope had long been a scarce commodity. Children played in puddles of rainwater mixed with debris, and elderly residents huddled together for warmth and support. It was a community that had been forgotten by many, left to fend for itself while the world moved on. The president's heart ached at the sight, and he turned to his advisors. "I want a full report on these conditions. I want to know what has been done, and more importantly, what we can do to help these people rebuild their lives." Over the next several hours, teams of social workers, medical professionals, and relief workers were mobilized. President Obama made several calls to local and federal agencies, urging them to expedite assistance to the neighborhood. The response was swift and overwhelming. Emergency supplies, temporary shelters, and medical aid were dispatched, and soon the streets that had once been filled with despair began to show signs of transformation. Eleanor, who had been a silent witness to these changes, watched in disbelief as her community began to receive the help it so desperately needed. Children who had once played in the shadows of neglect now smiled as volunteers handed out food and water. Elders, previously resigned to their fate, were seen conversing with officials about long-term housing projects. In that moment, the impact of one compassionate act spread like ripples in a pond, touching every life in the neighborhood. President Obama spent the rest of the day in the community, meeting with residents and listening to their stories. He sat with families, listened to their struggles, and assured them that no one would be forgotten. His presence was a source of comfort and inspiration, a reminder that leadership meant being accessible and empathetic to the needs of every citizen. At one point, while sitting on a bench with Eleanor in a small park, he said, "Sometimes the greatest strength is found in vulnerability. Your story is a testament to the human spirit, and I promise you that we will work together to build a better future." The day turned to evening, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the neighborhood had already begun its transformation. President Obama addressed the gathered crowd, his voice carrying both the weight of responsibility and the warmth of hope. Today, we have witnessed the power of compassion, he said, his eyes scanning the faces of those present. I know that many of you have been forgotten for too long, but today marks the beginning of a new chapter. We will rebuild not just your homes, but the hope that has been lost. Together, we will create a future where no one is left behind. His words were met with spontaneous applause, a mixture of gratitude and determination that resonated through the community. In that moment, the transformation was not only physical, but also deeply emotional. The once dreary streets were filled with the sounds of renewed life, a chorus of hope that echoed off the walls of broken buildings and mingled with the gentle breeze. In the days that followed, the incident became the catalyst for a nationwide movement. The story of how President Obama had personally stopped his motorcade to help Eleanor spread rapidly through social media and the news. People from all corners of the country were inspired by his actions, and the phrase, "the light of compassion," became a rallying cry for communities in need. Charitable organizations, local governments, and even private companies joined forces to ensure that the promises made that day were fulfilled. A comprehensive relief initiative was launched, combining immediate assistance with long-term plans for sustainable development. New temporary shelters were erected, and plans for affordable housing were set into motion. Medical teams conducted health screenings and vaccinations, and educational programs were established to help children in the community gain access to learning opportunities. The initiative brought together people from all walks of life, united by a common goal of restoring dignity and hope to those who had been marginalized. Throughout this period, Eleanor remained a symbol of resilience. Though her life had been marked by loss and hardship, her determination to care for her granddaughter and to survive against all odds inspired countless others. In quiet moments, she would share her story with anyone willing to listen, a story of love, loss, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. "I have seen so much pain," she would say softly, "but I have also seen the kindness of strangers. I hold on to that kindness as a beacon of hope for my granddaughter, so that one day she will know a life filled with opportunities and love." Among those touched by the movement was a young girl named Lila, whose own struggles mirrored those of Eleanor and her granddaughter. Lila had grown up in a similar environment, where the promise of a better future had seemed like a distant dream. Inspired by the stories she heard and the visible change in her community, Lila decided to take action. She began organizing small groups of children and adults alike to clean up local parks, repaint dilapidated walls, and even plant community gardens. Her efforts, though modest at first, soon blossomed into a grassroots movement that extended far beyond her neighborhood. Local newspapers chronicled her initiatives, and soon Lila was invited to speak at community forums, where she passionately advocated for social justice and collective responsibility. President Obama continued his visits to the transformed community, often meeting with local leaders and residents to review progress and listen to their concerns. In one memorable visit, he joined Lila and other volunteers for a community picnic in a newly built park. Sitting on a freshly laid bench, he listened intently as people shared their personal experiences of loss and hope. "Every voice matters," he told the gathered crowd, "and it is our duty to ensure that every person, no matter how small, is heard and supported." His words resonated deeply with the people, reinforcing the idea that change could come from the simplest acts of kindness. The transformation of the neighborhood, which had come to be known as Renewal Park, soon attracted attention from across the nation. Social media buzzed with stories of how a single act of compassion had led to an avalanche of positive change. Donations poured in from individuals and organizations alike, and volunteer programs were established to replicate the success of Renewal Park in other communities. The government, spurred by public demand, announced a series of policy reforms aimed at addressing homelessness, improving public housing, and increasing access to health care and education for the underprivileged. As months turned into years, the impact of that fateful day continued to grow. Eleanor's humble shelter was replaced by a sturdy community center that offered vocational training, healthcare services, and educational programs. Her granddaughter, Emma, who had once clutched a tattered cardboard sign in search of hope, blossomed into a confident young woman. Emma took it upon herself to mentor younger children in the community, teaching them that despite the hardships of life, they too could rise above their circumstances. "It is not our past that defines us," she would say, "but the courage with which we face the future." President Obama's act of compassion that day became legendary. In speeches and interviews, he spoke of the transformative power of empathy and the need for leaders to be accessible to all citizens, regardless of their status. "I realized that true leadership means not only guiding a nation through its challenges, but also standing in solidarity with those who have been forgotten," he said in one address. "Every life has value, and every person deserves a chance to rebuild their life with dignity and hope." The media continued to follow the story closely. Documentaries were made, books were written, and even school curricula began to include the tale of how a single moment of empathy had sparked a nationwide movement for change. The phrase, "the light of compassion," became synonymous with the idea that kindness, when applied with conviction, could illuminate even the darkest corners of society. Communities across America began to implement similar initiatives, ensuring that no one would have to endure the same level of neglect and despair that had once plagued Renewal Park. One crisp autumn day, during a ceremony held at a newly constructed monument in Renewal Park, Eleanor and Emma stood side by side. The monument, a graceful sculpture of a hand gently holding a small lamp, symbolized the enduring power of hope and compassion. As residents gathered to celebrate the progress that had been made, Emma spoke to the crowd, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "This is not just our story," she declared. "It is the story of every person who has ever felt forgotten. It is a reminder that one act of kindness can change the world." The ceremony was broadcast live, and people from across the country watched as the community celebrated its renewal. President Obama, who had continued to support the initiative from afar, sent a heartfelt message praising the resilience and unity of the people. "I am inspired by your determination and your ability to rise above adversity," his message read. "May this monument serve as a reminder that hope, like a small flame, can ignite a beacon of light that guides us all toward a brighter future." As the years passed, Renewal Park grew into a thriving neighborhood, a testament to what can be achieved when compassion is placed above prejudice and self-interest. New families moved in, drawn by the promise of opportunity and the community's unwavering spirit. Local businesses flourished, and public spaces were transformed into centers of cultural and social activity. Volunteers continued to work tirelessly, ensuring that the progress made was not lost, but built upon with sustainable development projects and educational programs. Emma, now a young adult, pursued her dreams of becoming a community organizer and advocate for social justice. She dedicated her life to mentoring others and sharing the lessons learned from her own experiences. "We all have the power to make a difference," she often said, "and it starts with a single act of kindness." Do not underestimate the impact you can have on the lives of others. The legacy of that summer day in Pacifica extended far beyond the boundaries of Renewal Park. It ignited a national conversation about the responsibilities of leaders, the importance of empathy in governance, and the need for systemic change to address the challenges faced by the most vulnerable members of society. Initiatives that began as local projects grew into comprehensive programs aimed at eradicating homelessness, providing quality education for all, and ensuring that healthcare and housing were recognized as fundamental human rights. President Barack Obama's intervention that day came to be remembered as a turning point, a moment when a leader chose to step away from the conventional path and embrace the human element of public service. His decision to stop his motorcade, to personally engage with a homeless elderly woman, and to act on the principle that every citizen mattered, set an example for generations to come. It demonstrated that the true measure of leadership lies not in the trappings of power, but in the willingness to listen, to empathize, and to act with unwavering compassion. As the Global Hope Initiative began to take shape, communities worldwide looked to Renewal Park as a model for change. Collaborative efforts emerged across nations, with governments, nonprofit organizations, and private enterprises working together to address the challenges of poverty, inadequate health care, and educational disparity. In bustling urban centers and remote rural areas alike, projects were launched to provide clean water, build sustainable housing, and create opportunities for lifelong learning. The message was clear: no one should be left behind, and every person deserved the chance to live with dignity and hope. In one particularly moving instance, a small village in Southeast Asia, long plagued by floods and economic hardship, saw the construction of a community center modeled after Renewal Park. The center served as a hub for vocational training, healthcare, and educational programs, offering a lifeline to hundreds of families. Local leaders cited the transformation of Pacifica's neglected neighborhood as the inspiration for their own efforts, and the story of Eleanor and Emma became a universal symbol of resilience and renewal. Back in Pacifica, the story continued to evolve. As the national conversation on social justice deepened, new generations emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. Students in schools organized community service projects, inspired by the idea that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. Public art installations celebrated the journey from despair to hope, and every mural, every sculpture, told the story of a community that refused to be defined by its hardships. Emma's journey took her on many paths. She traveled to different parts of the country, sharing her story at conferences, universities, and community events. Her speeches were filled with the honesty of someone who had lived through hardship and emerged with an unbreakable spirit. "I once stood alone on a crowded sidewalk," she would say, holding a cardboard sign that spoke of my pain and my hope. That sign was not just a plea for help. It was a declaration that I would not be invisible. And today, I stand before you, not as a victim, but as a witness to the power of compassion. In one memorable address, Emma recalled the day President Obama had stopped his motorcade. "I will never forget the way his eyes met mine," she said softly, "and how he promised that no one in our community would be forgotten. That moment changed everything for us. It was a reminder that even in the midst of great sorrow, there is always a spark of light waiting to be ignited." Her words resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom were moved to tears by the raw emotion and truth in her voice. Meanwhile, President Obama, even after leaving office, remained an influential figure in the ongoing efforts for social reform. He continued to support initiatives aimed at addressing inequality, and his personal involvement in that unforgettable moment in Pacifica was often cited as a defining example of empathetic leadership. His legacy, built on decades of public service, was enriched by the story of that summer day. A story that would be told and retold for generations, serving as a constant reminder of the impact that one compassionate act can have on the world. As the Global Hope Initiative expanded, it touched the lives of millions. In urban centers across the United States, similar movements sprouted up in neighborhoods where poverty and neglect had long been the norm. Collaborative projects ensured that no family would be left without the support they needed. Access to clean water, quality education, and affordable health care became not just aspirations, but tangible realities. The collective efforts of communities, fueled by the spirit of compassion that had been sparked in Pacifica, began to bridge divides and transform the lives of those who had once been abandoned by society. Years later, at an international summit on social innovation held in a grand convention center, representatives from dozens of countries gathered to share their successes and challenges. Amid the many inspiring stories, one presentation stood out, a presentation dedicated to the enduring impact of the Global Hope Initiative that had begun in Pacifica. Photographs, videos, and heartfelt testimonies painted a picture of transformation that transcended borders. Children who had once struggled to attend makeshift schools were now enrolled in modern educational institutions. Families who had lived in squalor now enjoyed the comfort of secure housing. Communities ravaged by disaster were rebuilt with resilience and care. The summit culminated in a moving ceremony at the United Nations, where a new monument was unveiled, a monument that symbolized the universal commitment to ensuring that no one would ever be forgotten again. The sculpture, depicting a young child holding a lantern high, was inscribed with the words, "Hope lights the way." As dignitaries and activists from around the world applauded, President Obama was invited to speak once more. His speech was a powerful call to action, urging every nation to recognize that the fight for justice and equality was a shared responsibility. "We have learned that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can ignite a movement," he said, his voice resonating with emotion. "Let us continue to stand together, to uplift every voice, and to ensure that hope never fades." Back in Pacifica, Renewal Park had evolved into a thriving community that stood as a beacon of change. Families flourished, local businesses prospered, and every street corner bore the marks of progress. The community center that had once served as a temporary refuge was now a permanent institution offering resources and opportunities for people of all ages. Murals and public art celebrated the resilience of its residents, and every time someone passed by, they were reminded that hope had indeed been restored. Eleanor, the elderly woman whose quiet plea had sparked the entire movement, lived out her remaining years in peace. Though frail and weathered by time, her spirit remained unbroken, and she continued to share her story with anyone who would listen. "I may have lost my home and my family," she once said, "but I have gained a community that cares. My granddaughter now has a future filled with promise, and that is the greatest gift of all." Her words were a testament to the transformative power of compassion and the enduring resilience of a human heart. Emma, now grown into a confident and empathetic leader, dedicated her life to ensuring that every child in Renewal Park had access to education and opportunity. She often visited schools and organized events that celebrated the achievements of the community. In one heartfelt moment during a school assembly, she addressed the students with a gentle smile. "Never doubt that your voice matters. Every time you stand up for what is right, you help to build a future where everyone can shine. Our journey is far from over, but together, we are unstoppable." The light of compassion became more than just a story of one day in Pacifica. It became a movement that inspired countless others around the world. From local neighborhoods to international summits, the message was clear. Compassion has the power to change lives, to heal wounds, and to build a world where every individual is valued and supported. Leaders, activists, and everyday citizens all embrace this vision, working tirelessly to ensure that the legacy of that summer day continued to flourish. As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean on another warm evening, the residents of Renewal Park gathered for a community celebration. The park was alive with music, laughter, and a sense of unity that had been forged through shared struggle and triumph. President Obama, now a revered elder statesman, sent a video message expressing his pride and hope for the future. "I am inspired by your strength and your willingness to come together in the name of justice," he said. "May this light of compassion continue to guide you, and may your example shine for all the world to see." In that moment, as children danced and families embraced, the journey of Renewal Park was not defined by its past hardships, but by the promise of a brighter future. The transformation that had begun with one man's decision to stop his motorcade for a homeless woman had blossomed into a powerful movement for change, a movement that transcended politics, boundaries, and differences. It was a reminder that when leaders choose empathy over indifference, the entire society benefits, and that every act of kindness has the potential to spark a revolution of hope. The light of compassion remains a living testament to the power of one person's empathy to transform the world. It is a story that continues to inspire, a narrative woven into the fabric of communities that refuse to let despair win. And as long as there are voices that speak for those who have been forgotten, and as long as leaders and citizens alike stand together to build a better tomorrow, the light of compassion will never be extinguished.